from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, President Biden calls Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal. This as the atrocities in Ukraine mount. And Ukraine's President Zelensky makes a powerful plea to U.S. Congress and Biden himself for more help. We're going to also take you to the front lines of the other war Russia is waging, a war on information. Plus, I will speak exclusively with Aaron Levy, CEO of Box, after the company's Investor Day. His thoughts on another kind of war happening here on the home front, and that is the war for talent in a rapidly evolving work world. The idea of work, of course, has changed a lot in the last 2 years. We're going to break down a top work shifting survey and show you how there's no going back to how it used to be. All of that in a moment, but first, stocks closing near session highs after Fed Chair Jay Powell struck a more positive tone on the prospects for economic growth as the central bank raised interest rates for the first time since 2018. Our Kriti Gupta has more. Kriti, walk us through the day.
Yeah, Emily, it's been a kind of a roller coaster of a day. You did see the day start higher, then end higher, but in the middle of the day, you did see stocks drop into negative territory. But take a look, the NASDAQ here is clearly outperforming 3.8%. But what's really the highlight is coming out of the Fed. We do know that 25 basis point rate hike was kind of put to work now. That was expected in the market. But the real kind of headline news out of the Fed was not that you did see the rate hike, the start of that regime, but the fact that the Chairman Powell came out and said, this isn't going to throw the economy into recession. Just stick with us. And that kind of positivity actually pushed stocks back away from negative territory into a nearly 4% rise. And speaking of extreme rises, take a look at the NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index. The likes of Alibaba, JD, putting some very strong gains. And this, of course, comes on the back of some very positive comments from China's own authorities saying that they're actually looking to kind of make a better dialogue in terms of delisting some of those stocks. They are looking to increase more liquidity into the system. That, of course, giving quite a bit of tailwinds to those ADRs. And of course, coming back down to the Fed, it really is about that 10-year yield. You did see that rise 4 basis points. But as you hear the Fed kind of talk about the future, front and center is going to be the conversation in Ukraine, specifically the commodity read-through. When you talk about things like energy, things like food prices, that's really where you're seeing a lot of that inflation really get pushed forward. And you can see just in the market reaction, they're very sensitive, not to the fact that you are starting to see that safety, that stimulus go away, but the fact that the Federal Reserve is actively trying to target some of these rising costs that you are seeing on the back of the invasion of Ukraine. And speaking of that, we should talk about what stocks didn't do so well during the session. And that, of course, is going to be some of those defense stocks that were doing so well in the weeks leading up to this. You did see Lockheed Martin, Raytheon as well drop. But traditionally, when we see those stocks drop, you tend to see cybersecurity stocks drop with it. And instead, you saw cybersecurity stocks actually rise. So you can very clearly see people favoring tech as opposed to the broader market here, Emily.
All right, Kriti, thank you. Now, as the invasion of Ukraine and attempts at negotiations continue, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky made this direct plea to America's leader in English.
President Biden, you are the leader of the nation, of your great nation. I wish you to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Jack Fitzpatrick on Capitol Hill for more on this. Jack, it was a powerful speech. It referenced Pearl Harbor, September 11th, and that direct message to President Biden. How has this speech to U.S. Congress influenced the president himself? Do we know?
Well, at least on Capitol Hill, that speech was taken in a very positive way. Lawmakers are very, very supportive of Ukraine. Every member I've talked to said they found it very inspirational. I just spoke to Richard Shelby, the top Republican appropriator in the Senate, who's responsible for sending funding, saying it was a great speech. It did not seem to persuade people on the specific request for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and there is some skepticism about the efficacy of sending them fighter jets specifically. Adam Smith, the House Armed Services Chairman, said he has some concerns about that. So there's really broad bipartisan support for Ukraine, and we may even see work on another funding bill, maybe in the next few weeks, as soon as the next few weeks. But some of the specific requests that might look like the U.S. itself is getting involved didn't really change anybody's mind in the White House or on Capitol Hill.
And obviously there's hope for talks between Russia and Ukraine. Where do those stand? And you know, could that change the conversation here?
It has not really changed the conversation yet. There's some skepticism on the U.S. side about Russia's faith in these talks, whether they're really good faith talks just yet, or it's an attempt to get a loosening of sanctions. So lawmakers on Capitol Hill and seemingly the White House as well really are a bit skeptical that the Russian government has changed their mind in any way. Obviously, they want those talks to continue, but it really hasn't changed the U.S.'s approach.
So what happens next? Obviously, we're waiting for President Biden to visit Europe next week. Certainly, lawmakers will have influence on him after this speech. But, you know, do we expect any change in course, any stepping up in terms of the aid, the support, the weapons that the U.S. is sending to Ukraine?
You can expect a stepping up of the sanctions on Russia and probably very likely support for Ukraine. It's not exactly clear what kind of support for Ukraine right now because Congress is waiting to see how much defense aid they will need versus humanitarian aid, but there is a lot of bipartisan interest. Lindsey Graham, who is the top Republican senator for funding the State Department, says he thinks there are already needs for the Justice Department and UN food programs right now. As far as sanctions, Congress is trying to get a bill together following up on the president's decision to revoke Russia's trade standing that would allow more tariffs on Russia. The House is having talks on that right now. We'll see if they also add sanctions under the Magnitsky Act. So those conversations are still going, but we could see a deal in the House and potentially a House vote as soon as tomorrow. That's what lawmakers are looking for. So on the sanctions and aid to Ukraine, we can expect action pretty soon in the near future, although Congress is leaving next week.
All right, Bloomberg's Jack Fitzpatrick on Capitol Hill. Jack, thank you for those updates. I want to continue the conversation now and turn to Russia's war on information. Tuesday, an employee of Russia's state Channel 1 television interrupted the main broadcast with a protest against Putin's invasion of Ukraine, saying, "Don't believe the propaganda. They're lying to you." This protester was later taken into custody, fined, but released, and is now awaiting an additional penalty. I want to talk more about all of this with Joan Donovan, the research director at the Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy. And that woman, Joan, was able to release a video of some more context why she was speaking out before she ultimately made that appearance on that main news program. But what she did is absolutely incredible and certainly a major risk. She's been released from custody in Russia. Why do you think Putin would do that?
Well, it's the first major test of this new law that was put into practice a few days ago, essentially saying that reporting about this quote-unquote special military operation had to use certain words, could not use the word war. And so this editor jumping out on screen, she worked at the TV station, is a huge deal. And the fact that she's been let out it's strange. It's actually propelling a lot of conspiracy theories online where, people are saying this is managed dissent. As long as people feel like there's a voice out there advocating against the war, then there's not much that they're going to do about it. But I happen to think that this was an authentic and real cry from the media itself that they didn't want to be part of this war.
This information blackout, the digital Iron Curtain coming down in Russia, the blocking of Facebook and Twitter. What does this actually mean for everyday Russian citizens? What kind of information are they actually receiving? How many of them can actually get around the firewalls and access information that is available outside the country?
Yeah, it's burdensome, but it's not. They can deal with it. what's happening is essentially that they still have access to television and radio, and so there's a large amount of state media still on the rails. But with the internet, it's different because the media from outside of Russia has a difficult time penetrating audiences and getting in. And so Russians have been, according to some recent reporting in Time magazine, for instance, Russians have been creating VPN parties where people get together and learn how to circumvent the ban so that they can access outside content that has been banned by the Russian government. What's even more difficult, though, is because of the way that platform companies have been acting very unevenly, it's hard to tell exactly what kind of content people are seeking out, and if they are essentially trying to seek out more Russian state media because maybe YouTube was the place that they originally were watching it, or if they're reaching out and finding more independent news and are able to access information about the war that may sway their opinion.
So to that extent, we've obviously seen video of Russians protesting in the streets. What do we know about how the vast majority of Russian citizens feel about the war? Do they support it or are they against it?
Well, this is another thing that's complicated by, the Iron Curtain, the digital Iron Curtain, if you will. Lots of independent media, particularly even the New York Times, have removed their reporters. And so getting a sense of what's happening in the streets is difficult, absent really deeply searching on social media to find TikTok videos. And, you're showing footage of people burning their Russian passports, that they don't want to be citizens of Russia, knowing what Russia's doing to Ukraine. And so as long as those videos and those the content about the protests is circulating, we can imagine the momentum is going to grow more and more towards this anti-war sentiment as, unfortunately, the death toll rises and the damage that's being done to the Russian economy increases. And so that's how I gauge as a sociologist what the temperament of the people are, is how many people are going out in the streets, how many people are getting arrested, and with every twist and turn of the sanctions, how many more people are willing to stand up for their own freedoms as well as to express this anti-war sentiment.
How are organizations like yours finding and debunking disinformation about the war on Ukraine? And I'd like to take it one step further, which is, why does Russia's disinformation campaign matter to a global citizen? Why does it matter to someone who isn't in the country and not necessarily on the direct receiving end of that?
Well, the why is a big deal for us, which is why we do this work, which is essentially we believe on our team, and I think being an academic, I believe that humans have a right to access the truth. And I believe that if you were to search on a platform for, did the Holocaust happen, you shouldn't get a bunch of anti-Semitic websites and posts. You should actually get content that is going to satiate that need for information. And so when we go out and look for disinformation, one of the things that we look for is essentially what is a hot button issue that has the potential to be polarized. And then we look on either side of the issue and try to assess. First and foremost, we look for, is there any what we would call digital shenanigans going on? Are there bot networks, questionable engagement, lots of seemingly to be spammy accounts participating? So that's like the low level, easy stuff to spot. And then as we start to look at very well crafted propaganda campaigns, especially the ones that come out of Russia, we see them across every platform. They're not on a single platform. They're very well spread out, but they tend to have a kernel of the same messaging. And they sometimes will use a very particular word that it kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, for instance, at the beginning of the war, people had heard the term denazification, and that was a very strange word. And so we looked into that and saw that there were different propaganda networks trying to make that that idea that Putin was going into Ukraine to denazify Ukraine. The different networks that were trying to make that happen and why it was not a very successful one. Another one that we would look at in particular is we're always keeping an eye on things like biolabs or bioweapons because of the way in which those words were contorted during the pandemic. And of course, we're still in it. But sometimes if you pay attention to disinformation long enough, it's in a pattern. And so we often see the same tropes come back again and the same actors come back.
Right.
And so with the biolab one, over the past few days, we've been hearing that the U.S. and Ukraine have been colluding to build biological weapons together. Of course, that's something that, people have roundly debunked. But at the same time, it becomes a really important source of animosity and confusion, and it can lead to demoralization, of people that would be in support of ending the war, feeling as if maybe there's something worth, there's something that Russia might be onto here. And so I think the last thing I'll say on this is that, truth needs an advocate. And so our work is that work.
Joan, we're grateful for your work to get us to the truth. Thank you for breaking down some of these really complex issues. Joan Donovan, Research Director at the Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center. Appreciate your time. Coming up, helping Gen Z succeed with the rising cost of college, the impact of the pandemic. We're going to talk with one fintech startup trying to make it easier for young people to realize their dreams. The founder herself, no stranger to uprisings and standing up to dictatorship. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Helping students achieve their dreams, that's the ultimate goal of the new fintech company Moss. By reimagining banking for Gen Z and helping students overcome financial barriers to pursue higher education. This as we come out, hopefully, of a 2-year pandemic that has greatly impacted young people's schooling and their mental health. I want to talk about all of this and more with founder and CEO Amira Yayoui. Amira, thank you so much for joining us. You have such a fascinating personal story, and I want to start there with what drove you to found your company. You were a leader of the Arab Spring in Tunisia. You fled to Paris. You couldn't get a college degree yourself. And that's what led you to this. Can you talk a little bit about your background and your own experience with social movements?
Yeah, absolutely, Emily. Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, a year ago, my story was not that common, and it's becoming very common now. It's what's happening in Ukraine. Every global crisis ends up with young people losing their chance to a normal life, and that is also higher education. Millions of people are actually fleeing to Europe. I was one of those students 10 years ago. The difference is, in my case, there was no, I would say, like popular interest in what was happening in Tunisia. And so I was an illegal immigrant in France. I was not allowed to get a higher education. It is the case of most European countries. As an illegal immigrant, you're not allowed to education. I hope Ukrainian students will have access to it. That was obviously like the trigger of part of Moss, but the big trigger for Moss is to help everyone get access to opportunity and to dignity, and that through our app that helps students get higher education, get an education, go to college with less loans. We actually help them get free money.
Right. Now, you said on Twitter you lost a friend in the war on Ukraine, and you also say this isn't the first time you've lost a friend to war, but that this time it feels different. Can you explain why?
Yes, it feels different because it feels like it could have been avoided. We know how horrible is Putin. I am now worried about friends that I have in Ukraine, but I'm also worried about friends that I have in Russia who will also get crushed by the regime. the thing is that the whole world knew about how horrible is Putin, how far he could go, and we waited. We waited way too much. I was listening to Zelensky, and it feels lonely to be part of the European, part of Europe, but at the same time left alone.
Now, there are 3 million people who have fled Ukraine. Many of them are young people. How do you think what you've created with Moss could help some of these
Absolutely.
people as they have to start over? They have to start over and pursue their dreams elsewhere. They may never get to go home.
Absolutely. I mean, they will be needing a lot of support to get an education. We are helping students in the US. I hope the US will join the efforts of locating and welcoming refugees from Ukraine and all the refugees actually in the world. Through that, we do have students who don't have access to education in the US and be treated as a second category citizens in this country, like the DACA students. We do have a ton of students who don't come from maybe wealthy background, who didn't have access to understanding that education is within reach, who don't have access to that. So with Moss, our goal is to make the dream of higher education accessible to everyone in the US and hopefully soon outside.
All right, well, we'll be following your progress, Moss founder and CEO Amira Yayoui. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Much more ahead. We'll be right back. This is Bloomberg. A few other stories we're watching. Amazon has won unconditional approval from the European Union for its plan to buy MGM for $8.45 billion. That deal coming as Amazon faces increasing pressure to acquire more programming in the very competitive streaming market. And retail sales growth in the U.S. slowing last month is suggesting that consumers are pulling back spending in some categories as inflation cuts into buying power. Overall sales rose 0.3%, but if you factor out gas station sales, actually fell 0.2%. Coming up, I'll be joined by the CEO of Box, Aaron Levie, an exclusive interview fresh off the company's Investor Day, how he hopes to keep beating Wall Street expectations, and his thoughts on the future of work and the war for talent. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Box, one of the leading content cloud providers, just finished its annual Analyst Day. The company estimates double-digit revenue growth by 2025, which may surprise some investors. Other software companies, which were growing quickly during the pandemic, are kind of now struggling to maintain that momentum. Joining me now, the CEO of Box, Aaron Levie. Aaron, good to have you back here on the show. Talk to us about your outlook here. You're outperforming the street's expectations 4 quarters in a row. What do you attribute this to?
Yeah, so thanks, Emily, for having me. Overall, there's sort of 3 big mega trends that enterprises are dealing with right now. The first is the continued push toward hybrid work. The second is everything is going digital first, even as we come back into offices and as the world starts to open up a bit more. And then finally, cybersecurity challenges and compliance risks are at the center of what every organization is facing today. So when you think about those 3 big mega trends, the way that companies work with their content, these are their financial documents, their contracts, their marketing assets, their most important and sensitive intellectual property in their enterprise. All of the ways that companies work with that content needs to be shifted and changed to be able to support those 3 big trends of people being able to work and collaborate from anywhere, being able to automate workflows around content, be able to keep it protected and secure. And so we're fortunate because we've been building a platform for now over 15 years to build the leading way that companies can manage and secure and govern their most sensitive and important data in the enterprise. And that's what has both, allowed us to deliver 4 quarters of accelerating revenue growth last year, and we believe, many, many years to come as we put out our new 3-year guidance or target model just this afternoon.
You fought off a pretty bitter proxy battle at the height of the pandemic, and I'm curious what impact that's had on you. Has it influenced strategy and how you map out and predict future growth?
Yeah, so at the start of our kind of activist journey, we partnered with our investors generally and laid out more aggressive both top line and bottom line targets to really drive the future of the company. And I'm really proud of how the team and the company delivered on those targets in the past couple of years, especially last year. I think going forward, you're going to see us take a very, strategic look at how we drive growth in the future. You're going to see our multi-product strategy and our content cloud portfolio really driving our growth rates in the future. At the same time, we think profit and driving increased profitability is going to be important. It has allowed us to build a much more durable financial model that certainly in this market is, I think, holding up very well, and that will continue to be the case over the next few years and beyond.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the war for talent. You and I spoke at almost the beginning of the pandemic, and you acknowledge it's going to be hard to get people to come back to the office at all, especially engineers. And I'm curious what you're seeing. I know you're just starting to reopen your offices across the country. Do people want to come back? Are they actually coming back? And how is the working world going to forever be changed by what we have experienced?
Yeah, no, the world is fully changed. There is no going back to kind of pre-2020 ways of working. That being said, there's a lot of demand both within Box and certainly peer companies that we talk to for those that live near offices to come back in occasionally or more frequently, depending on the individual, as a means of being able to see colleagues in person and be able to kind of catch up and do some of their work in person, whether it's a brainstorm or in a conference room, or even being able to continue to work in their traditional environment. That being said, we know that hybrid work is the future. So things are not going to look like they were 2 years ago, where everybody kind of came into the office every day, 5 days a week. At the same time, I think things will be not as remote only as they have been in the past 2 years. And so the future is hybrid. And at the center of enabling a hybrid strategy is cloud technology and being digital first in how you operate. And so for us, that's going to mean that more of our meetings continue to be fully virtual. That's going to mean that we continue to stitch together the work that we're doing globally using the cloud, whether you're coming into an office or working remotely. And I think that's going to be the case for most companies going forward. And certainly as a platform provider, we think that's going to create a huge opportunity for us to innovate for customers in this new hybrid workplace, where you want to be able to share and collaborate on your most important digital information, whether you're doing that from home or doing that in an office. And that's obviously the platform that we're building out.
Now, the question is, how hybrid is the work world going to be? San Francisco, for example, some people say it's a ghost town. I saw a raccoon walking down the sidewalk in the middle of San Francisco in the middle of the day. True story.
To be fair, I saw that raccoon before the pandemic. So it's,
okay. But does San Francisco recover? Do we get back to the vibrant city filled with tech workers that it was before?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I live in the peninsula, so I can't, I'm not the best proxy for the latest goings in San Francisco. I was there last week, and at least outdoors, to me, it felt pretty similar to how things have looked in the past few years, even before the pandemic. It was, a lot of bustling around the city. But that being said, office buildings are clearly not at capacity. People are not coming back into the office every single day. And that does have probably an impact at some point on the feel of the city. So I can't predict what SF specifically is going to look like. What I do know is the future is hybrid. Different companies, different cultures, different teams, and different individuals will likely land on a different cadence or rhythm as to how often they want to come back into an office or be fully remote. And so I think we're going to all have to get used to not thinking of this as sort of a binary outcome of you're either fully remote or you're fully in person, but instead one where things are going to be hybrid and companies are going to exist on a continuum around how much of their work is done remotely or fully digitally and how much is done in person. But no matter what, ultimately you're going to need to be able to stitch that work together using the cloud, and that is a guarantee for the future.
How concerned are you, Aaron, about the macroeconomic outlook right now, given a war happening on the other side of the world, but impacting everyone in the world?
Yeah, I mean, we're an interconnected society and economy, and obviously the invasion of Ukraine is a huge tragedy, obviously on a human kind of life and impact level. It obviously does ripple economically throughout the world, to varying degrees, probably based on the industry that you're in. And I'd say it's probably too soon to sort of try and model or predict anything about what that looks like. But right now, our focus is, anybody at Box with Ukrainian relatives or that's impacted directly by this, just making sure that they're in a good spot to the extent possible, and that's sort of our focus. But I think it's premature to sort of try and model too much of the long-term economic impact of this.
Okay. Aaron Levy, thanks for joining us today on your Analyst Day. Always appreciate having you on the show.
Emily.
CEO of Box. Bye. Now, taking on Amazon. That is the focus of Instacart CEO Fidji Simo as the grocery delivery embarks on a massive transformation that she wants to drive. Simo spoke exclusively with me for our latest edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Take a listen.
We want to help our grocers have all of the technologies they need in order to compete with Amazon. To your point, Amazon is investing very heavily in grocery, and they have a ton of technological abilities. And that was a big part of why, in my first week in the job, I decided to acquire Caper, and which is a smart cart technology, because I want all of the grocers we work with to have the same edge that Amazon has. And so I see it as my responsibility to build all of the technologies that they need to compete with Amazon so that we can be the antidote for them.
Then there's Uber and DoorDash and GoPuff and go outside the United States, and the list goes on. How does Instacart stand out from all of these different players that are competing for a piece of that pie?
These players fundamentally compete with our grocers. They want to attack the market by being first-party retailer, owning their own inventory. And so that's not our approach at all. Our approach is really building technology and fulfillment to help our grocers. The second thing is that these players are very focused on one particular piece of the market, which is quick commerce. And while that's really important, and we've certainly seen our own convenience business double in the last 6 months, we actually address all of the needs that consumers have. We're not just quick commerce, we're also the weekly shop, we're also your monthly bulk stock up, and that's what retailers want.
Now, inevitably, after I interview you or Dara Khosrowshahi at Uber or Tony Xu at DoorDash, I will get feedback on social media from shoppers and drivers who are not happy. One Instacart shopper posted a picture of an order, showed they delivered 51 items, got paid $7.95 and no tip. Is that representative?
No, that's very much not representative. And I think, fundamentally, shoppers care about their earnings. They really want flexible earnings whenever they want to. And so our job is to make sure that they have more access to work.
So what is representative? What is a normal wage for a delivery like that?
We're very much in line with kind of industry average for these kinds of jobs. And so that's something that we always try to kind of nudge the consumer of like, hey, your shopper did a really good job. Can you tip a little more?
What if they don't, though, right? I mean, you're leaving it up to the customer. And some customers think, well, you should build this into your price.
Well, we actually do, and we make it very transparent to the shopper before they accept an order, what the order is going to look like, how much we're going to pay them, and how much the consumer is paying them. And so they can decide whether they take an order or whether they refuse it. And that's the kind of flexibility that our shoppers really value and the kind of transparency that they want.
Are you seeing a labor shortage right now? And what are you doing to combat that?
It's different in different places. Our demographic of shoppers is completely different from food delivery and ride sharing. We're 70% women and half of them are moms. And that's because a lot of the job at Instacart is very different than just being in a car with strangers. It's about like going to the store, doing a good job of customer service, of really picking the right products for the consumer. And we are seeing that being very appealing to women.
The instant delivery space, or 15-minute delivery space, is that something that you want to double down on?
It's something that we absolutely want to offer because, again, we really think that our customers want the full range of options. 15-minute delivery is not going to be relevant for everything. I mean, it's going to be very relevant on Thursday night when I'm craving chocolate ice cream, and it's really an emergency when that happens.
Exactly. So, chocolate chip cookie dough for me. You've made some strategic acquisitions, as you've mentioned. What about in the rapid delivery space? Joker, Gorilla?
No, we haven't, and the main reason is because all of these players are doing very much first-party grocery. So that means they own inventory, and so it's not something that's interesting to us because our approach is really build the infrastructure so that our grocers can do 30-minute delivery or 50-minute delivery, whereas these players are doing it kind of on their own, bypassing the grocers.
Do you think retailers trust you? Do they trust Instacart?
So, when I took on the job, I was surprised by the strength of our retailer relationships. But there was always this kind of lingering question that retailers had for me, which was, what are your long-term intentions? Are you planning on becoming a retailer at some point? And I had to kind of address that head on and explain to them in great detail why it would make no sense for us to really go in that direction and why we were going to be able to build a much bigger company if we just focused on what we're good at.
You can catch more of my exclusive conversation with Instacart CEO Fidji Simo, where we talk about the impact of inflation on food prices, her move from Meta and working with Mark Zuckerberg, and her journey from a small fishing town in France to becoming the head of Instacart. All that on the latest episode of Studio 1.0. Coming up, is the NFT fad losing steam? How NFT sales have fallen, and what it means for those making a living off them. Next. NFT sales had a breakthrough year in 2021, with volume hitting $23 billion in the last 12 months. But sales are now plunging amid the ongoing sell-off in cryptocurrencies. I want to dig into this with our crypto contributor for our crypto report, Sonali Basak. So there's a lot of people trying to make money, earnings off the NFT industry. Sonali, what does this mean for them?
Yeah, there's a few things here, Emily. First, we have to look at just how much the trading has dropped off. And if you take a look at this chart here, there was this humongous boom, according to data from NFT Go, and then a significant drop off this year. In January, according to nonfungible.com, NFT weekly sales peaked at nearly $1 billion. And now, the past week, that is less than $70 million. So less than 1/10 of the weekly sales we've been seeing in January. You asked what it means for people who are getting paid in this market. So if you're somebody who had moved over, this story that we had written about Spotify, a musician's earnings going from $300 to $60,000. Remember, the price of Ethereum from a year ago has also declined significantly, in addition to sales just dropping off. It has recovered a little bit this year, and if you look by market cap, it has really held up quite a bit as far as the market goes. But remember, this market still is dominated by a lot of whales, really 10% of the buyers accounting for 90% of the market here.
So why are NFTs dropping off? I mean, does it have anything to do with the macro environment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, of course, we've seen the volatility in so many of the cryptocurrencies that we track. But if you look at it, I'm going to steal a little bit here from investor Lee Drogan, because he points out what we were just showing, that idea that trading volumes have really fallen off. And what he says is that until the volume and retail investors come back, prices are not going to go up as well. One thing he points to is ApeCoin, and a market that can potentially hold up prices for a few days, whether that'll really start to bring people back, Emily.
All right, Shonali Bosick, thank you for that update. We're going to keep following on that one. Appreciate it. Coming up, a year into the Great Resignation, how workers are feeling about their current jobs and the idea of returning to the office. We're going to break down Microsoft's annual Work Trend Index next. This is Bloomberg. As more and more companies bring employees back to the office, many are saying, I don't think so. A brand new survey by Microsoft, its Work Trend Index, finds that even more employees are considering quitting their jobs this year than last, and then more than half of younger workers are contemplating a job change. For more on this and the future of work, Jared Spataro is here, Microsoft's Vice President for Modern Work. Jared, thank you so much for joining us. So why do you think the Great Resignation is in fact accelerating rather than slowing down?
Well, the survey data tells us that we're just not the same people who went home to work in March of 2020. What's happened over the course of the last 2 years is that people have changed in really significant ways. And one of those ways is how they think about work. Flexibility has become something that's so important to them that they're telling us that they are willing to give up other things, including move to a new job in order to get it.
What's the biggest mistake companies are making right now as they try to get workers to come back?
Well, the thing that jumped out to me in the survey data, when we asked leaders what they were planning to do in this return to office, over 50% of them told us that they were going to have their employees come back full-time, 5 days a week, no flexibility. And that contrasts with over 70% of workers who say that flexibility is something that they treasure, that they want to make sure is the part that they keep coming out of the pandemic. So we see some tension being set up here that's going to need to be worked out over the coming weeks and months.
How do they work that out? I see you talk about managers being wedged between the boss and their own teams.
That's right. Yeah, we do think that managers are going to be the key here. The thing that we're finding as we go and combine all of the data points from the research and get down and do kind of what we call qualitative work is that the most practical thing you can do is encourage your managers to be working with their employees and talking through what we call individual and team agreements. In other words, hey, how's flexibility going to play out for you? What does it mean? And can we find a win-win here? Here at Microsoft, we've done that recently. We found that over 95% of the people who had those conversations said that they were able to reach an agreement that really worked very well for them. So we've got some data that indicates that this can be done. You just have to make sure you take the time to do it.
How's the return to work going at Microsoft so far?
Well, we are in the process of doing that. We've declared here in the Puget Sound, the Seattle area, that we'll be heading back to our final stage of flexible work, what we call this flexibility stage on March 28th. So this month is a big month for us. Many of our managers, though, have already had those conversations, and we feel like we're set up. We're going to learn just like everybody else, though. There's a lot to learn here. It's a very dynamic time.
Now, there's a big question about the future of emerging technologies in the workplace. A lot of talk about the metaverse. Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg, Meta, has one vision. Microsoft is working on products to take companies to the metaverse. Do employees want to work in the metaverse?
Well, we asked them that. It's kind of interesting. When we asked employees about the metaverse, 13% of employees said they didn't even know what the metaverse was, but 52% said that they were open to this idea of using digital immersive spaces in the metaverse for meetings and team activities in the next year. So we've got this sense that there still is a lot to be figured out in the metaverse, but let's say just a little over half of people are pretty open to being able to use the technology.
So as we look over the next year, what do you think the biggest pain points are going to be? Because, I talk to a lot of people. They don't want to go back, or they're reevaluating.
Well, again, I think it comes back to this idea of employee expectations and comparing those to employer expectations. I think that's going to be where we find the friction. If I just give you a sense of how people are thinking. But who's
going to have to compromise, the employees or the employers?
It depends on the market. And today it's an employees market, we would say. And so I think that employers are going to learn a lot here as employees kind of talk about how important flexibility is. And, you cited a stat earlier, it's 52% of Gen Zs and millennials say that they're willing to move over the next year if they don't get the flexibility they need. So I think that gives you a sense, at least for where the employees are in their minds.
All right. Check it out, Microsoft's latest work trends report. Fascinating stuff that you uncovered. Jared Spataro of Microsoft, thanks for joining us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Join us tomorrow. We're going to be speaking with Jennifer Tejada, CEO of PagerDuty, along with Kirsten Green, founder of Forerunner Ventures, about where she's placing her biggest bets in this market. Plus, re-listen to today's show on our new Bloomberg Technology podcast. Yes, the show is now a podcast. You can find it on the terminal, online, Apple, Spotify, iHeart. I've listened to it myself and it's not bad. So I hope you'll check it out. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.